This is going to be a rough one. After Daima's conclusion, Akira Toriyama's previous editors have been doing some interviews, and we have some new information which unfortunately doesn't paint Torishima in the brightest light, and it looks like he was actually a bit abusive toward Toriyama, and this kind of thing is, from what I understand, more common in the manga and anime industries than you would think. We'll get into that. We'll also get into the unfortunate Dragon Ball Super update and some new news for the Dragon Ball video game world and an unfortunate delay to Sparking Zero DLC. Let's get into it. First, I want to talk about the Dragon Ball Super hiatus. This was coming from Todd Blankenship on X. He said this month's feed up notes that the DBS manga will still be on hiatus next month. Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG Stories is likewise on hiatus, but scheduled to start up again in the July issue, which means next issue due out in May. So implicitly, DBS isn't scheduled to be in that issue either. So it does not look like, for a couple months at the least, Dragon Ball Super will be returning, which is, again, very unfortunate. This delay has taken a bit longer than most people would like, but there is a little bit of silver lining to this. Dragon Ball Super Volume 24 had the official cover revealed in high quality, and it looks amazing, and it is releasing April 4th. So hopefully we have something relatively soon, but as far as the artwork goes, it looks amazing. Toritaro cooked, as always. Let's move on to the Sparking Zero DLC news, which, as you would guess, is unfortunate. With the DLC 2 delay, it also means DLC 3 for Sparking Zero has been delayed as well. This is what I assume will be the pack where we get Adult Super Saiyan 4 Goku, if I had to guess, since it's the second part of the Daima DLC, covering the second half. It's now slated for July through September 2025. It used to be April through June 2025, so that is a substantial delay, which is again unfortunate, but it is what it is. And in case you missed it, the DLC 2 was delayed from January through March to April to June. So again, unfortunate delay, but it is what it is. And for you Legends players, again, I said Dragon Ball news is scarce, so I'm going to report on the mobile games as well. Dragon Ball Legends is adding Majin Buu. So if you guys are excited and you're Legends players and you want to know who the next character is, it's Majin Buu. So I guess get hype. Alright, so this next part is going to be a bit complicated. I'm sure I will ruffle some feathers in the community. So again, I say all of this with the best of intentions, but there's this interview out and I need to talk about it. And don't blame me for how you feel, because I'm going to be reading from the interview and then I'm going to be giving my thoughts, which I think are pretty even-handed. So this is coming from Vinexus, and it's from the Koso Hoso podcast, which was featuring a bunch of Toriyama's editors from Dragon Ball. And this gets into the Torishima story. So let's just go ahead and start off with Vinexus. His tweet says, Torishima mocks Daima, and he posted the translation here. He says, Torishima, referring ironically to Dragon Ball Daima, deliberately mispronounces the title as Arumashiki, a wordplay based on Arumashiki, a Japanese term meaning unworthy or inappropriate. Nakatsu corrects him, pointing out that the proper title is Daima, but Torishima keeps the joke going, twisting the name into Ayamaru, in which Japanese means to apologize. Essentially, Torishima is having fun playing with the project's title, twisting it into words with humorous or negative connotations, and a deliberately provocative and joking tone. And there's another interview where I'm pretty sure Torishima is not aware of Toriyama's involvement with Dragon Ball Daima. I think from their perspective, they are still in the Dragon Ball GT era with Toriyama and his involvement with Dragon Ball, because they said that he would just approve things without much involvement. But as we know from several interviews, that Toriyama's been much more involved with the Dragon Ball franchise since Battle of the Gods. So I'm not sure where they're getting the information, but it is what it is. I mean, I'm pretty sure they also aren't very involved with Dragon Ball Super's manga, and that they had never read it, and that, you know, if you guys been following along, Toritaro had his art featured at a big panel, and Torishima just looked at it and was not very impressed and said it lacked something that was missing from Toriyama's art. Which, again, Toritaro is not reaching Toriyama's heights, but Torishima, that was his first time looking at it, so that tells you he's probably not keeping a close eye on Dragon Ball these days. Now, this is where things get scary. And again, this is going to ruffle some feathers, so don't come for me. Just keep that in mind. Alright, so again, coming from Vinixis, translated from the Koso Hoso podcast. Bear with me, he says, during an especially intense period between the end and start of the year, Toriyama found himself having to work simultaneously on Dragon Ball and a one-shot episode. Again, this is back in the day when Torishima was editing the manga. He says, to make matters worse, Jump required color chapters to be submitted 2 weeks in advance, forcing authors to work on 2 episodes in parallel. At that time, Toriyama was also suffering from tendinitis and claimed he could no longer draw. And that's pretty serious and probably very painful. Kondo, who was working with him, realized how serious the situation was and decided to speak with Torishima. The three of them met at a cafe to discuss the possibility of adjusting the schedule or canceling one of the 2 projects. During the meeting, Torishima, fully aware of the difficulty, handed Toriyama a pencil and asked him to write his name. When Toriyama managed to do it, Torishima replied, "See, you can draw," putting him in a tough spot when it came to continuing to refuse. Despite his frustration, Toriyama accepted and completed both works on time. Torishima comments that for him it was mainly a psychological matter. If Toriyama hadn't been able to write his own name, he was ready to give up and tell Kondo to let it go. It was a gamble, but in the end it worked. A surprising outcome. Now, Torishima is presenting this in this interview as if it's something to be proud of, which is weird. He's basically saying that he pressured Toriyama into continuing work on the manga, even though Toriyama was saying that it was hard and put him in pain. Like, this is borderline abusive, if not abusive, because Toriyama, from everything we know, was a quiet but polite guy and wanted to get along and work with people, and this just is a little bit cruel. And I think this is something that a lot of people talk about with the manga and anime industries, about how they take advantage of their employees. So this is insane. And the next story isn't as bad, but it's still kind of bad. So again, coming from Vinixis translating on Twitter, he says, Toriyama had a clear agreement with Torishima. If he ever missed even a single deadline, he would be forced to move to Tokyo. He hated the idea so much that he made it a personal rule never to miss one. Torishima had initially suggested the move to make the workflow easier, especially in an era when not even fax machines existed. Again, this one's a little bit more reasonable. He goes on to say, to collect storyboards and manuscript pages, he had to personally travel to Haneda twice a week. When fax machines eventually started being used in the editorial office, Toriyama refused to install one for a full 2 years. With a fax, he would no longer have been able to make excuses. He'd be forced to send in his work immediately, even if it wasn't ready yet. So again, this is a little bit more reasonable, and this goes along with how Toriyama talked in the past about how he would be lazy and then finish up his work like near the end of the week, very close to the deadline. He says to meet his deadlines, Toriyama said he'd sometimes slept only 6 or 7 hours over the course of an entire week. At one point, he couldn't even tell traffic light colors apart. Still, he stubbornly refused to move, saying he couldn't live in a place without a visible horizon. This is amazing. This is beautiful. This is like Toriyama being in touch with himself and his heart and his soul and nature. Not to get deep and philosophical on you, but yeah, that's like he couldn't live in a place without a visible horizon. Toriyama was something else, dude. He says Torishima decided not to force him, set up a schedule with deadlines planned up to 2 months in advance. If Toriyama couldn't keep up, the plan was to change the workflow and move him to Tokyo. Later, during the period when Kondo took over as his editor, the very first thing he demanded was that Toriyama buy a fax machine to make communication easier. Very, very polite, I guess you could say. So, again, Torishima seemed like he was willing to work a bit more with Toriyama on that one, but the other part that I read was a little icky. That definitely had me going, dang, Toriyama. I mean, I don't know. Do you guys think that's abuse? I'm pretty sure from where I'm standing, that's abusive behavior at the very least. I don't know if it's coercion legally or what, but it's definitely making me think of Torishima in a different way. And then the last thing I want to talk about is their harsh criticism toward Shueisha, again coming from Vinixis on Twitter, translating the interview. He says Toriyama's longtime editors expressed harsh criticism toward Shueisha, believing the communication surrounding his passing was too sparse and impersonal. Additionally, after the author's death, no official memorial event was held, a decision that might align with his preserved nature, but in their view, was still a lack of proper message from the Jump editorial team, as well as a public acknowledgement of Toriyama's enormous contribution from Dr. Slump to Dragon Ball. Which, yeah, they were pretty quiet about it, but as we all know, Toriyama was a quiet guy, so we don't know everything behind the scenes. Maybe they did it because there were specific wishes for him not to go very public with his passing. They did announce it a few days afterwards, and this is kind of common. Like, if a celebrity dies, a lot of the times we won't even know about it until like a week later or a few days later. They go on to say they emphasized that even a symbolic gesture would have been enough, for example, displaying the iconic image of Goku waving goodbye on the facade of the Jump building, or creating a commemorative space where fans could leave messages. In other countries, public tributes such as murals and celebrations have been, or are being, organized, and they question why a similar homage wasn't made for someone so central to the history of manga. Very valid point. There is concern that this attitude may continue in the future with other creators. If not even Toriyama received a more meaningful tribute, what will happen with the mangaka of the next generations? Very haunting note to leave this video off with, but that was the biggest notes from all these interviews that are coming out that I wanted to go over. So, what do you think? Pretty insane about the whole thing about basically forcing Toriyama to continue. And that kind of goes into whenever Toriyama originally wanted to end Dragon Ball after the Cell Saga, but they kind of pressured him into continuing to the Buu Saga. That was not as bad as this, though. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Torishima went too far with that? And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like, comment down below, and please subscribe to keep up to date with all things Dragon Ball news and commentary, because, in case you noticed, this video is a little bit over 7 days from the previous video. I'm trying to make these weekly still yet, but news is scarce. So I'm trying to keep up with everything, but also wanting to include the most important things. Anyways, guys, that will be it for this one. If you enjoyed, make sure you like, comment down below, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Peace off.